Shalom, shalom, afalanmu, surmu anna doktor, antamu atoy, edu amunu.
Gila mah dah agama, dua saya ada makan juga, dua saya mau ini bapak aja lagi. Goge anda goge, buntu tak ada songi, ada songkok.
Nah, misalnya orang buku kong udah, mana kat Korea kari,
These photographs were taken in April and May of 1973 by the members of the Sobek expedition during the first descent of the OMO River in southwestern Ethiopia. This is one of the least explored and most primitive areas remaining on our Earth. Now, 6 months later, Sobek has returned to further investigate and record the sights and sounds of this extraordinary wilderness and to navigate what is perhaps Africa's wildest whitewater river. Unlike the early African travelers who explored vast expanses of the continent on foot, or the modern big game seekers who crossed the trackless savanna in Land Rovers, Sobek chooses a relatively new and unique vehicle for entry into the unknown, the whitewater inflatable raft. This type of raft was specially designed for the rapids of the Colorado River, permitting easy passage into a remote area that would otherwise be inaccessible. The river itself is nature's own umbilical cord, along which the living spectacles of Africa are concentrated. For the next 22 days, the members of Sobek will ride this course and witness the exotic animals, plants, and people who inhabit the Omo Basin. It all adds up to high adventure on an African photographic river safari. Ethiopia is situated in what is known as the Horn of Africa, the northeast corner of the continent on the Red Sea. This expedition will be navigating the Omo River from its beginning, near the village of Abelti, down to the National Game Park on the Mui River tributary, some 330 little-known miles downstream. The boats on the expedition are named the Awash, the Omo, and the Gaba, each after a major river in Ethiopia which it has previously traversed, and the Gypsy, a maiden boat who has just joined the wandering band. The boatmen who pilot these 4 rafts are all veteran professional guides from the whitewater rivers of the western United States. With hopes of placating the many crocodiles who inhabit the Omo River, the expedition itself is named after the ancient Egyptian crocodile god Sobek, who was widely worshipped along the nearby Nile. White water, the churning, boiling, complex currents that can turn a placid boat trip into a rampaging roller coaster ride at the turn of a bend. The elements of excitement and challenge that are always part of the African experience are brought to new heights when combined with the thrills of riding rapids on a river with a gradient steeper than the Colorado. And what better way to view the sights of primitive Africa than through the window of a crashing wave? The sight of the first hippopotamus lumbering across the shore brings out the cameras. A hippo can be a beautiful sight in its own natural surroundings, but a fearsome one too. The crew is understandably a little apprehensive of the animal, who enjoys a reputation as Africa's greatest menace to river travel. And as the boats steer clear, the hippo slips into the water, where he feels safest from his own greatest predator, man. Early in the trip, a series of long and complex rapids is met. Here, the canyon bed is basalt, a hard volcanic rock that resists erosion and creates the worst of the cataracts. Although the rapids provide one of the major thrills of this expedition, they also present one of the greatest dangers. Besides the usual risks of riding through rough water, in Africa, one has to be extra careful of not being tossed out of the boat because of the crocodiles who sometimes lurk at the base of the rapids. Each boat chooses its own course in the rapids, and here the Gaba boat has entered a shallow channel on the left, and the boatman executes a smooth run, missing all the boulders and big swells. Now the Awash boat attempts the same run, but cuts a little too close to the left shore and hangs up on a rock. Wishing to avoid the mistake of the Awash, the gypsy boat tries a different run with some rather exciting results. The Awash frees itself and moves to help the boatman in trouble. But the powerful current pulls in the wrong direction and forces the boat into an eddy. A little worse for wear, the boatman makes it to shore safely. The only casualty is the loss of his hat. Because all of the rapids on this remote river are unnamed, Sobek decides to name the more significant ones. And in honor of the gypsy boat's heart-stirring run, this rapid is christened Gypsy's Bane. One of the nicest features of the OMO is its ever-changing character, and after the pandemonium of the rapids, the calm of the next canyon provides a pleasant respite from the excitement. The peaceful mood is enhanced by the echoing songs of cheerful birds overhead, who seem to be in perfect tune with their unsullied surroundings. At the end of this serene stone concert hall, a natural arc-walled gateway marks the passage to new aspects and features of this chameleon river. Named by the Greeks and meaning literally horse of the river, the hippopotamus is one of the most common sights along the OMO. Over 1,600 were counted on the first Sobek expedition. And next to the rapids, they are the greatest obstacle to normal navigation. Proportionately, they are the fattest of all the animals on Earth, weighing sometimes up to 10,000 pounds. Obviously, they are always granted the right-of-way at intersections. The most striking thing about the hippo, when first sighted on land, is that its short, stubby legs can support its massive frame and weight and carry its bulk nimbly along at a fast gallop. Several times, the boats would round a bend and surprise a resting herd of hippos on a beach, which would result in a sudden stampede into the river, creating a minor tidal wave. The river is where they feel safest, and in its depths is where they instinctively run and hide whenever they are frightened. If the boats come upon them already in the water, the hippos usually submerge themselves up to their turreted eyes and nostrils and peer curiously at the passers-by, and then disappear completely underwater to contemplate the intruders. Hippos divide their time fairly equally between land and water. They like to lounge the day away either strolling along the muddy bottom of the river or sunbathing in the shallow water or on a beach or rock. In the evening, they leave the river to roam the neighboring fields where they will graze as much as 150 pounds of grass a night. The river, though, is the rightful home of the hippo. Here is his birthplace and his graveyard. Here he will decompose and feed the crocodiles and fish, and through his single tragedy, others in the balanced workshop of nature will live on until it is their turn. Sometimes the sound of an approaching rapid would prove to be something much less formidable. A side stream spilling its rushing waters into the Mother River. Coming up on one of the over 200 clear tributaries of the OMO is always a welcome sight. After walking up the stream through a series of smaller waterfalls and cataracts, the main falls is met. A thundering cascade that plummets more than 150 feet. A decision is made to name the spectacle Hosanna Falls, after a nearby village and the praise of glory. With its perpetual misty breezes and waving blankets of long green grass, it certainly inspires some glorious thoughts. Here, a relaxing afternoon is spent lolling in and about the cool gardens and pools of this African paradise. One impromptu game that develops is to try and get past the wind and spray storm at the bottom of the falls and under the pounding water itself. The more sedate of the crew enjoy the game from a distance. Finally dunking himself completely under the falls, Rich's reward upon re-emerging is a clean scalp and a round of applause. Some have argued that the original Garden of Eden lay on Ethiopian soil. It is not a popular opinion, but in a place like this, it seems entirely within the realm of possibilities. And today, there are 16 more proponents to that theory. Once, millenniums ago, the OMO River flowed into the White Nile as a tributary. Now, due to a geological uplifting of the earth across the river's ancient path, the silt-laden waters of the OMO end their journey in Kenya's Lake Rudolph, a giant desert lake which has no running outlets and which is over 200 miles from the Nile's nearest meander. For more than a century, explorers' minds have mulled over the prospect of exploring the secrets locked in the OMO Valley. But because of the rushing waters and swirling rapids of the ruthless river, no rigid boat was ever launched upon its surface. It was only with the advent of the flexible, durable, and easily patchable inflatable boats that navigation became a possibility. And Sobek had the opportunity to realize an expedition that had too long been mere conjecture. Sandy beaches and moss-covered banks line the OMO River and provide Sobek with comfortable spots for setting up camp. Within minutes of landing, a tiny town of tents is erected and camp life begins. A fishing line is cast, and within minutes, a strike, and a 20-pound fish is reeled in. On most of this river, where underwater life has rarely, if ever, been exposed to man, it's hardly fair to call fishing a sport. And anything pulled in more than 10 minutes and weighing less than 10 pounds is a rare catch. With the exception of fish, all the food for the first 2 weeks of the expedition is packed in waterproof containers and carried on the boats. Then, halfway downstream, a food and supply cache is picked up for the remainder of the trip. Dinner, prepared and cooked over the open campfire by the expedition's resident gourmet cook, John, is always a delight, despite its sometimes deceptive appearance. The long, hot African day draws to a close. The sun crosses the OMO sky in exactly 12 hours on each day of Ethiopia's 13-month calendar, and is the unerring clock by which life sets its cycles in the bush. As the expedition members slip into sleep, another world of living, breathing creatures takes its shift and fills the air with its cacophony of sounds.
I'd like to go over the section of the river that we're going to navigate today.
Each morning, before loading the boats and heading downstream, the leader of the expedition, Richard Bangs, goes over the escape routes and emergency procedures with the crew.
So obviously,
In an area where unfamiliarity is the greatest danger, it is essential to be prepared for the unexpected. As the day progresses, the flotilla finds itself drifting through a river valley of magnificent grandeur. The walls of this enormous valley loom several thousand feet into the air, rivaling in places the proportions of the Grand Canyon. At river level, the exposed foundation rock of these canyons is sometimes millions of years old. It is in these underlying exposed stratas of sedimentaries that archaeologists of recent years have made some of their most startling discoveries regarding the origins of man on the lower reaches of this river near Lake Rudolph. There, fossilized remnants have been unearthed of one of the world's oldest men, who drank from this river over 2.5 million years ago. Up ahead, the expedition confronts a disturbing sight, a brush fire, probably ignited spontaneously. Though the temperatures on and along the cool waters of the OMO River itself are usually comfortable, just a short distance up the dry hillsides, the African sun beating down on an area only 7 degrees north of the equator can be brutal. A fire such as this can rampage for days, even weeks, destroying wildlife, crops, and sometimes villages. Only the circling birds of prey can find benefit from the holocaust. In the wake of the wild blaze, they'll scavenge some of their best meals. After the ordeal of watching the brush fire, some refreshment seems in order. A short hike up a tiny creek has revealed a 15-foot slippery groove that running water is smoothed and polished out of a rock cliff. This may not be the most important discovery of the expedition, but it is undoubtedly the most fun. Everyone has his own approach and style for careening down the chute. While some have no reservations about hurling themselves down the slide, others prefer to think about it.
How can anybody just stay way down there?
Now, push yourself off from there, you gotta get momentum.
There appears to be no lack of encouragement for the hesitant, and no regrets after the plunge. Somehow the aura of Africa, with its dark, dangerous environment, pitting itself against the most intrepid and machismo of men, breaks down here and shows a playground face of childlike innocence and fun. Another big rapid obstructs the river. The most critical part of successfully running a rapid is the entry. Once the boat is caught in the unrelenting current of the rapid, it has relatively little maneuverability. So it is most important that it be lined up for the approximate intended course before reaching the fast water. The gypsy boat decides to enter this rapid first, and the boatman is taking special care to avoid repeating his previous mistake. His approach is slow and methodical, and he is angling downstream so that he can pull his oars against the strong current to slow down his run. This should give him extra time to ferry himself away from rocks and whirlpools. At the bottom of the rapid is a hydraulic, a huge elongated wave that churns back on itself and is capable of flipping a boat. The boatman attempts to cheat the rapid by riding down its side, but he nips the edge of the hydraulic, which twists and folds the boat for a tense second. Suddenly, a gray rock at the head of the rapid begins to move. It's a hippo, who was disturbed in his slumber and who accidentally gets into the act. He tries to escape upstream, but is instead drawn into the powerful currents of the rapid and swept downriver. Now the OMO boat follows the path mapped out by the swimming hippo and negotiates a perfect run through the rapid, which is spontaneously dubbed Potamus Plunge. Finally, the Awash boat takes its turn and gives its passengers a wild, rearing ride down the middle of the rapid. Just like the Gypsy, the Awash is heading for the corner of the hydraulic, and it buckles like a wounded snake as it is stung by the tail of the churning wave. The oar-powered rafts enable the crew to quietly sneak up on otherwise unapproachable wildlife for some special pictures. What would be a trophy shot for the hunter is a prize shot for the camera, a handsome waterbuck. These are the most populous of the many different antelopes along the Omo, and the most stately. The horns of an adult male will arch up over his head for 3 feet or more, and both sexes are characteristically marked with a white patch of fur on their rumps. Sometimes the boats pass within a few yards of these animals, who pause for a few beautiful seconds in confusion before running into the shelter of the forest. Nothing the size of these rafts, except for the familiar and unthreatening hippo, has ever approached the waterbucks from the river before, and they are as much in awe of what they see as the expedition, until their instinctive fear of the unknown carries them off. Between picture-taking and while on the lazier stretches of the river, the more mundane chores of the day can be attended to. For almost a month, the crew is a world away from the modern conveniences that are second nature to most of us, and they adapt to pioneer life enthusiastically. A pair of hands in the river becomes the Sobek washing machine, and an unoccupied tube of the boat becomes the clothesline. Before attempting to run any big rapid, especially one on a river such as this, the boatmen scout the rapid, study it carefully from a good vantage point on the shore in order to plot out the best possible course. As it turns out, this spirited stretch of whitewater is actually a simple and safe rapid with no hidden boulders or tricky cross currents. Just some good-sized rolling waves down its center. The crew of the first boat through has stationed themselves at the base of the rapid in case of emergency. Robbie decides to try the reportedly wild ride at the bow of the boat, and he relinquishes his oars to the second in command. Rich, on the Awash, has also opted to yield his oars so that he can experience the bucking bow and let out the cowboy in him, and he hangs on for a dizzy trip. This hippo sniffs the strange scent that accompanies the unfamiliar sight of the small fleet of rafts and gives the camera a leery look of warning. Although the hippos, with their unpredictable behavior, are an endless source of entertainment, they also can cause some problems.